Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, it's going to be a beginner PyGame intro on how to make objects move in PyGame. And I'm going to show you three different types of movement. Thing one will be kind of moving the object or the player on the screen using manual control. The second thing will be kind of how to move the world around a player so that you get the illusion of movement by moving the background or objects around the player, but not actually moving the player. And then the third way will be a way to animate a player in PyGame so that you kind of get the movement of lesson one of part one, but with an animated display over top of it using like a sprite sheet type setup. So without any further ado, let's take a look at how to do these three different types of movement in PyGame line by line together. Alrighty, let's go ahead and just import PyGame right up front and then do PyGame.init, basic stuff you need for PyGame to work. Now let's make the width 800 pixels and the height 500 pixels. I'm assuming you're building a game, so you can make the width and height whatever size you want. The screen will be equal to pygame.display.setMode width, comma, height, just like that. Very cool. And then let's say pygame.display.setCaption, totally optional step. And we will say pygame movement, just like that. Now, a couple other things we need. Timer.tick, not .tick. Timer equals pygame.time.clock. See, I'm trying to go too fast and I'm making mistakes. All right, and then let's say the FPS is going to be 60. We'll need those pretty soon. And we are just setting up a PyGame window as fast as we can. So let's say run equals true. And then while run, this will be the main game loop. We want our timer to tick at our frame rate. And then we want the screen to fill it with whatever background color you want. I'm going to fill it with black because black looks cool and high tech. Now we need a way to escape this infinite loop. So we will say for event in pygame.event.get, which is PyGame's built-in event handling. You guys know that by now. We will say if event.type is equal to pygame.quit, just like that, then run equals false. There we go. But then, still inside the while loop, we will say, well, run isn't false, pygame.display.flip. So draw everything onto the screen. And then outside of the while loop, pygame.quit. Now, if we run that, just to make sure no errors, no silly business, we have an 800 by 500 window. PyGame movement is the title, and we are ready to draw the player on the screen and then figure out how to make him move. Okay, and I think this is the most common type of PyGame movement. I think this is why most people probably clicked on this video, was to figure out how to make a player move. So let's say we have two variables for our player. We have player X and player Y, right? Also known as their coordinates. Let's go ahead and call this also, let's call this part one, because I want to put the code for part 1, 2, and 3 all in one PyGame file, or Python file, so you have this as a reference as you make more games. If you ever need to reference how you made something work in the past, we'll do it here. And then we'll say also that the player speed will be equal to 3, okay? So when we are moving, we'll move 3 pixels kind of per click, because if you're only going 1, it's sort of super slow and boring. Okie doke. Enough creating variables. Let's do something with them. Let's go ahead and say if part 1, because if it's part 2, we might not want to draw the player on the screen. So let's say if it's part 1, let's draw the player. And now we have to call the function. Now we have to define the function, okay? And I think, in my personal opinion, you can disagree if you want, that's fine. I think a rectangle is kind of the easiest thing to use for a player, even if you get to the point like we will in part 3 of this video, where you want to replace the player with like a sprite, an image. You probably will still need a player hitbox, which the easiest way to do collisions for that, in my opinion, is a rectangle. So we're going to pygame.draw rect, and we're going to put it on the screen, and I'm going to make it orange so it's super clear what the player is. And then rectangles need 4 arguments, an X and Y starting coordinate, which will point to the top left corner of the rectangle, and then width, and then height. So we'll do 100, 100, so it's a square. I'm going to make it solid, so the next argument after those 4 square arguments is a 0, and then I'm going to make it a rounded rectangle with radius 5 on the corners. And that's all I'm going to do for draw player. We are going to change where the player X and Y coordinates are, but not inside the function. It's a lot easier to do that outside of the function. Otherwise, we'd have to pass those coordinates in and pull them back out. Okay, but if we boot this up, you'll see we have an orange rectangle, 100 pixels by 100 pixels at position 300, 300. Again, that refers to the top left corner. So let's carry on. It's on the screen, and that's great, but how do we make it move? Okay, well, let's come into our event handling, and let's say if part 1. Again, I don't really want this in part 2 when I'm focusing on making the world move around the player. So I'll say if part 1, and now I'll say if event.type is equal to pygame.key down. Oop, that needs to be all caps. Good catch, guys. You saw that one. Now, if event.type is equal to pygame.key down, now we want to start checking the specific keys. So if event.key is equal to pygame.k underscore right, then we want our x direction to be equal to 1. And then we'll copy those 2 lines there, and we'll do a couple of elifs, all right? So elif, elif, and elif. And strictly speaking, I don't think you need these to be elifs. They could just all be individual else statements. But it's not a bad idea, because you can say, hey, if you just checked and you saw that the first one was done, you don't have to do this one, okay? Now, we're going to do that for right, we're going to do that for left, we're going to do that for up, and we're going to do that for down. One thing that might not be super intuitive is that up will actually be -1 for the y direction, and down will be +1. And that is because in PyGame, 0, 0 is the top left. So the numbers get larger in the y coordinate as you go down the screen. So anyways, we need basically this entire key down stuff for key up. Otherwise, you'll never be able to stop the player. And so we'll say now if event.type, and I get a lot of questions about why stuff is not drawing properly or not updating properly. Indentation is really important in this event handling. So make sure that this if part 1 is at the same level of indentation as if event.type, which is 1 level under for event in pygame.event.get. And then make sure that this all matches up kind of how you see it on the screen. Okay? So what we're going to say is if we have a key up, meaning I released an arrow key, reset the direction back to 0. That means that when I click a key down, I want to move. And then when I release that key up, I want to stop moving. Okay, pretty straightforward. And now what we're going to say is at the same level of indentation as pygame.display.flip, we are going to say if part 1, because we don't want to do this in part 2, I think. We'll say player X plus equals player speed times X direction. Okay, so this means that the player speed that we defined as 3 a little earlier, if part 1, player X plus equals player speed times X direction, and then player Y plus equals player speed times Y direction. Okay, so I don't think we initialized a lot of these. So we didn't initialize X direction in the beginning. We'll say 0. Y direction in the beginning, we want that to be equal to 0 as well. We did call out player speed, and we did call out player X and Y, so I think we're good there. Now let's say if part 1 player, that should be it. So let's go ahead and fix our errors real quick. Okay, for some reason, the if part 1 indentation got all goofy, but I think we're good now. I think we're back on track now. All right, let's boot this up. I think with just kind of that simple code there, bool is not callable. Interesting. Oh, did I say if part one with parentheses? You silly goose, it's just a Boolean. There we go. All right, now I'm going to press the up key, and I move up the screen, and I'm going to press the right key, and I move to the right, and I move to the left, and I move down. And if I'm moving up and to the right, and I change keys, and I click the left key, I'll start moving left immediately. So that's really cool. Like I can get kind of this smooth, continuous movement around the screen. And it feels really good. It feels fun to move around in. So that is part one. That is how to move a character or an object on the screen using PyGame. Let's take a look at item 2, which is going to be moving the background behind the player so that that feels like movement. Okay, and I'm going to collapse down all of this movement for if part one and if part one, and it's just going to make it easier to read, okay? So now let's take a look at what we want to do for part 2. So we'll come under here, we'll say we have this thing, part 2, and that's going to be equal to true now, and this will be false. So we're just on part 2, and I'm going to make a new variable called world speed, and it's going to be the speed at which things are going to go by us when we're moving, technically, okay? So world speed will be equal to 10. And now let's make some obstacles, right? Something to see on the screen that, that will tell us that we're moving, I guess, in time. All right, and let's put 100 pixels from the right edge, and then let's put a few off screen to the right so that they can move to the left and sort of tell us that there's movement going on, all right? And let's just start with that. We've got 3 basically X coordinates here for obstacles, and we are in part 2. So let's come down under the drawing the player, and actually let's go ahead and say if part 1 or part 2. Let's still draw the player to show that this is kind of a stationary point of reference. But now we'll say, okay, if part 2, let's also draw the world. All right, let's draw the world behind the player. And now let's define draw a world. And the first thing I want to do in draw a world is just draw the ground, right? Sort of pygame.draw.rect, and this will go on the screen. And what color is ground? It's brown. And the starting X coordinate will be 0, and the starting Y coordinate will be the height minus 100. We will make it the full width of the screen, and it only needs to be 100 tall. I'm not going to mess with making it any extra optional parameters. It doesn't need to be rounded or anything like that. But now let's say for I in range length of obstacles. All right. And let's go ahead and say pygame.draw.rect, and let's draw little red rectangles for these obstacles. So screen, red, and the X coordinate will be obstacles at I because we're going through a for loop. And then the Y coordinate will be height minus 150 so that I can make them 40 wide and 50 tall. And we'll just have these little red rectangles on the screen. Okay, and if I boot that up now, we're only going to see one rectangle, right? Because we only drew one of those 3 on the screen as the game boots up. But what we can do now is we can take movement similar to what we did for the player movement here, and I'm actually going to just kind of steal this. But what we're going to do is we're going to modify it for the obstacles, okay? So I'm going to come down under that, and I'm going to say elif part 2, all right? Part 2. And I'm going to get rid of the Y's, all right? Let's say we were playing some sort of like the dinosaur jumping game that you play when Safari is out or Google Chrome is not working, and you can play the little dinosaur running game. So basically, I'm going to use the left and right arrow keys to move directions now, but instead of the if part 1 where I move the player, let's make a new one, which is going to be if part 2. Then what I'll say is for I in range length of obstacles, okay? So however many obstacles I have, that's how many times this for loop is going to run. And I'm going to say obstacles minus equals world speed times X direction. So if the player is moving right, that means this is a 1, and I actually want the obstacle to subtract 10 from it. So I want it to move left. But if I am trying to move the player to the right, then I want to move to the right. Yeah, okay. Crazy, right? And let's go ahead and say if obstacles I gets to be less than minus 300. Yeah, let's say minus 300. I don't know. Doesn't matter. Obstacles, you guys aren't going to make this specific game. You want to know how to make stuff move, okay? So if obstacles gets to less than negative 300, we will say width plus, and let's introduce a little RNG in here because it's fun. And we'll say anywhere from 0 to 300, and we need to import the random module. So let's do that. All right, so now we have import random up here so that we can make this randomized. But then we'll say elif obstacles I greater than width plus 300. So if you move more than 300 off screen in either direction, I'm going to swap a new obstacle into the list, basically. I'm going to make this obstacle jump sides. So that way there's always 3 obstacles in my list that are going to potentially appear if you keep going the direction you're going, okay? Random.randint, and I think this will become more obvious. So let's say negative 300 all the way up to 0. Is that what I want to do? Yeah, I bet that's what I want to do. Okay, so let's boot this up. I think this is everything we need to do. Let's boot this up and let's take a look. Minus equal for list and int is an error, 85. Oh, yeah, obstacles I. All right, there we go. Great job, everybody. Now let's go to the right. Oh, I'm moving to the right and the obstacles are moving, and I'm moving back to the left and the obstacles are moving. Now let's keep going to the right. Oh, look, the obstacles are kind of randomly generating that way. Oh, let's go back to the left. Oh, look, the obstacles are generating in a really stupid spot. Okay, we need to fix that real quick. If obstacles gets to be greater than width plus 300, is that what was happening? No, the obstacles would be getting... Yeah. Oh, it's because I have width plus. Okay, dummy. All right, let's try that again. Let's go this way. Bang, that looks way better. That looks way better. So now I can kind of infinitely go in either direction, and the world is moving behind me, but the player's not moving. Okay, so this is type of motion number 2. I still think it's super useful, especially in like an endless runner type game or like a Flappy Bird type game. You need to simulate motion in your game, but your player is actually relatively in the same spot on the screen at the whole time. So the mode 1 of movement is kind of what you do for like Pac-Man or Donkey Kong, because the player is moving around on a map on your screen. This mode is far more like what Flappy Bird does or Subway Surfer or any of those endless runner games. There's simulated movement, but the player is more or less in the exact same spot in the whole game. And of course, you can do both of those, right? Like Super Mario Brothers, kind of the player moves around on screen, but when he gets close to the right edge or the left edge, the world then moves as well. So definitely knowing how to combine these two can be super useful as well. Now let's take a look at the third type of movement I want to talk about, which is actually just animation. So it kind of combines part 1 of moving a character around with overlaying an image or a sprite on top of that. So let's go ahead and collapse this down, and let's go ahead and say for the movement or part 3, right? So we want the if part 1 or part 3, but what we're not going to do is we're not going to draw the player. So we had drawn the player for part 1 and part 2. We're not going to do it for part 3. We're going to make images for the player instead, and we're going to animate it. So now let's go ahead and drop a variable part 3, and let's make part 1 and part 2 false. And I don't know if I've said this yet in this video, but this code will absolutely be linked below as well. So if you want to get this and play around with turning 1 or 2 of these off and then the third one on, just to see it yourself, you can grab all that code for yourself, okay? So we are going to have the same movement as part 1, and we're going to have the same player X and Y coordinate updating as we did for part 1. But in part 3, what we're going to do instead is we're going to say if part 3, which is what we're on now, then we're actually going to draw the sprite. Okay, and what I want to do to make drawing the sprite, define draw sprite, I want to make it pretty simple, so I'm not actually going to use the sprite class, which is something you can do in PyGame. And honestly, if you want to get really into it, there are so many great tutorials on how to draw, how to utilize the sprite class in PyGame. I strongly recommend a channel called Coding with Russ if you haven't seen them before. His PyGame tutorials are so good. They make mine look like absolute amateur hour. So he has a really good one on sprites. Okay, now let's go ahead and check out, let's draw the ground again, same as we did in part 2, but we'll just draw the ground so that we have some reference to sort of reference like our sprite jumping. Okay. And so that's the exact same rectangle that we had in part 1. But the thing that we need to do now is we need to figure out where the sprite is on screen and choose image accordingly. Okay, so this whole thing is going to boil down to blitting block transfer screen.blit the proper image onto the screen. But to do that, we have to upload some images. So I have a folder in my same folder that my .py file lives in, and it's called images, and I have 4 images. I made these in PowerPoint in like 30 seconds, okay? This is what the guy looks like when he's idle. This is what he's going to look like when he's jumping with his arms and legs all like forward, as I put it. And then here's walk 1. He's got this leg and this arm in front. And then here's walk 2, and he's got this arm and this leg in front. So basically the walking sequence is going to be like this, 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 this. And if you think that looks stupid, that's fine. Use your own images. I am using 4 quick things that I made in PowerPoint for this teaching purpose. So the important part is that I'm having fun doing it. All right. Now, I've done this in a lot of tutorials, but I'm not going to assume that you've seen them. I like to combo my loading the image in and scaling it to the size that I want in the same line of code. It definitely does make it harder to read. You could do these in 2 separate lines, but just know what I do first basically is I load the image in. So images / and this is going to be walk1.png. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm loading in the image, but what I'm doing here is I'm scaling that image and I'm putting it in the size that I want. And my width is approximately 2/3 of my height, so I'm doing 80 by 120. And then I'm gonna copy that whole line 3 more times. And we are going to just change it to be walk 1, walk 2, and then I think it's idle 1 and jump 1. Okay, and you could put these in the list if you wanted to. If you had a really elegant animation or a ton of frames for all these different modes, you definitely could and honestly should put them in a list. I only have these 4, and I'm just going to make one more variable. I'm going to make an animation underscore counter, okay? And I'm going to set it to 0 initially. But that should be all we need to do here, I think. Let's go ahead and draw the sprite. Okay, and let's just start by saying if the x direction is not equal to 0, then I know I want to move, okay? If the x direction is equal to 0, I can just idle, right? But if the x direction is not equal to 0, I want to increment my animation counter. I don't want to pass it in as a parameter. I think that's unnecessarily difficult. So I'm just going to say, hey, global animation counter. This gets really messy if you're doing global for like dozens of parameters. So you can kind of get away with it with one variable here, but it might not be the most Pythonic. Your teacher might not like it is what I'm saying, and some dorks on the internet. All right, if the animation counter, I'm sorry, that was mean. If the animation counter is less than 15, then your image should be equal to walk_1. Now, let's say if the animation counter is less than 30. And remember, because we have an FPS of 60, these are basically quarter seconds is what we're saying. And now think of what I said the 4 steps of our walking animation are going to be. So if x direction is not equal to 0, that means we're walking. I'm going left or right, basically. And so if the animation counter is keeping track in quarter seconds of the 4 phases, it'll go from walk 1 to idle to walk 2, and then we can say else image equals, and then idle again. And then we need to, there we go. Okay, then we're done with this if-else statement, but we do want one more thing here, which is if x direction is equal to -1, we actually want the image to get flipped. So we want the image to be equal to pygame.transform. Let me scroll down a little. Pygame.transform.flip, and we want it to flip the previously defined image in the x direction and not the y direction. Okay, so what we're saying here is if I'm going left, then all of those images should just get flipped so that it looks like I'm walking to the left and not the right. Now, let's go ahead and say else, because this is the else to the if x direction not equal to 0. Well, else the x direction is equal to 0. Okay, then I'm just going to permanently sit on idle, and I don't have to worry about any of the animation counter nonsense. Now what I'll say is if the animation counter gets greater than or equal to 60, it's been a whole second of movement, and I'm going to reset it to 0. Okay, this is maybe not professional game animation, but the concept is there, and that's the part I like. Now let's use that jump. Let's use that jump image just to, say we did. And I'm going to say if the player's off the ground. So if the height is above, minus 220. So, the ground is 100 and then the player is 120 roughly. So that'll be about the time it looks like the feet leave. And that's when I'll make the image just equal to jump 1. And I specifically saved that for last because I don't care if you're moving left or right. If you're in the air, I want my image that shows the player in the air to take precedent, okay? And then I'm just going to draw screen.blit, block transfer, draw the image onto the screen at position player X, player Y. Okay, so I'm doing all this inside the draw sprite function. We collapse that down, and what we see is that we should just do part 3, draw the sprite. We can forget about these. We can forget about that world movement from part 2, and we just have the player X movement from part 1. Let's check it out. All right, I've got my little guy. He's standing there idling. I'm going to go to the right. And honestly, it looks kind of fun. It's a 4-stage walking process. It's super low tech. Let's jump in the air. Oh, look, it's my jump image. Okay, so again, I made these images in PowerPoint. I'm not like going for graphic designer of the year or anything, but you can see even when I'm moving left and right, I am in the air on some sort of jetpack or something. So if you've seen my more advanced games on the channel in PyGame, you know that I am not a complete hack. I actually know how to make decent games, but the purpose of this video was to show you all different types of movement in PyGame. So I hope you got what you clicked on this video for. This was how to move objects in PyGame 3 different ways, sort of as complete of a crash course as I could do on the subject. So I hope you found it useful. Be sure to leave a comment letting me know what you want to see next on the channel, as well as if you have any questions about what you saw in this video today. Thank you so much to my Patreon supporters, Dale Topley and Philip Nunez. I cannot believe we are almost at 10,000 subscribers. Thank you everyone who leaves likes on videos, subscribes to the channel, leaves super nice and helpful comments on all my videos. It has been awesome growth on the channel. I appreciate you all so much. Until next time, good luck with your projects. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.